This is Flipping Junkie Podcast, episode 13. Welcome to the Flipping Junkie Podcast. My name is Danny Johnson, former software developer turned house flipper, flipping hundreds of houses. Each week, we bring you interviews, strategies, stories, and motivation to help you get started flipping houses and on your way to becoming your own boss and achieving financial freedom. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's get to it. Hello and welcome to the Flipping Junkie Podcast. I'm your host, Danny Johnson. Now, anybody that's followed Flipping Junkie blog for any length of time knows I don't really care much for rental properties. Really more specifically managing rental properties. I really do enjoy fixing up a piece of junk house and selling it quickly for a nice profit. And I'm sure I could learn to love rentals if I just knew how to do it with as little hassle as possible. And that's why I decided to have today's guest on the show. He's an expert on cash flowing houses and apartments. His name is Joe Fairless, and he controls more than $21 million worth of real estate, attends more Third Eye Blind concerts than anybody else, and is author and comedian and host of a very popular Best Real Estate Investing Advice Ever podcast. How's it going, Joe?
It's going really well. Thanks a lot for having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show. Could you tell us a little bit about you and what type of investing that you mainly focus on?
Yeah, sure. Basically, I raise money and buy apartment communities with investors, and we share in the profit. So I focus on multifamily investing. When I first got started, I was buying single-family homes for my own personal portfolio. Then I realized that I wanted to scale up and get things moving quicker than what they were doing with single-family homes, and that's why I got into apartments.
Awesome. Yeah, and real quick about your podcast. Now you have over 300 episodes now,
I do
and
about 375, I think.
375. That's amazing. Now I was episode, I think 294, and we talked about building credibility. So that's already been a little while since then. Yeah, so just bear with me. I'm still new at this, but we'll get going. Um, so what is your backstory though? How did you get started in the business? What got you interested in real estate in the first place?
Well, what got me interested in real estate is I I'm from Texas. I lived in Dallas, Fort Worth for anyone who's from that area. Fort Worth for my whole life, basically. I lived in Houston a year when I was very, very young, but basically grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. I went to school at Texas Tech, and I majored in advertising. So I wanted to compete with the best of the best in advertising. So I moved up to New York City and climbed the corporate ladder working at advertising agencies. That went really well. But if anyone knows anything about marketing and advertising professionals, or at least that career, you'll know that you don't make any money when you first start. You make, in fact, I was making less than minimum wage when you factor in all the hours I was working. So I didn't have any money, and I thought, well, when I do have money, I've got to be prepared. So I started doing some research, and eventually I was reading books, and I read one book called Investing for Dummies, and that book talked about investing in LLCs, stocks and bonds, and real estate. And I really gravitated towards real estate. And then I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and after that, as the story goes with most investors, I was really hooked on real estate.
Wow, yeah, the Rich Dad Poor Dad book, I read that as well, and it really is, you know, it's really changed the way a lot of people think about money and investing and everything. It's an incredible book.
Yeah, it changed my perspective on things, and to compound that interest, I once I saved up $1,000, I didn't really know much about investing, and I went to my bank. I saw that there was a CD, certificate of deposit. It was like 1 point something percent. It was much higher than what I was making in my savings account, so I thought it was a really good deal. Well, they held my only $1,000 hostage for 12 very, very long months. 12 months, $1,000. And then I finally got a return of like it's like $18.
Wow.
Um, and then they took taxes out of that $18. I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to figure out some other way of making things happen. And that's whenever I got really serious about real estate, took my studying to the next level, and then started being active on different online forums and going to different seminars. I went to a Rich Dad Poor Dad seminar, a 3-day seminar. The one that costs like a couple $100, not the one that costs thousands. Um,
Right. So one of the entry ones,
yeah,
sort of
one
to
of
get you into the more
yeah,
expensive ones.
yeah, and I thought the entry one was well worth it, and learned a lot, and then just kept on learning, and eventually bought my first house in 2009.
And you bought that as a buy and hold.
Yeah, bought that as a buy and hold, because I was living in New York City, but I bought in, well, the first house was in Duncanville, Texas, so about 15 minutes south of Dallas. So
So
I
how did you find that deal if you were in New York?
just found it through my real estate agent. My sister is a real estate agent in Dallas Fort Worth, but she didn't work with me on the first property. She was focused on some other things, so she referred me to one of her friends who's a real estate agent, and 1,500 miles away, I was able to buy a place without ever visiting it because the real estate agent took pictures, took video, we got an inspection report, and there's really nothing for me to do. It's just other than knowing the area, there was really no need for me to be present. So I
Right.
never made the trip.
Did you give the agent any sort of criteria to look for things before she passed along information about any of the properties to you?
Yeah, I was very, very specific on the properties that I was looking for. One was I wanted to cash flow at least $100 a month. Two was that I wanted to have at least $10,000 worth of equity built into the property before I closed on it. And three, I wanted to be close to move-in ready. And in hindsight, I understand, especially you're probably like, chomping at the bit, like, what the heck you talking about? Moving ready. You're buying at a premium. And perhaps I was buying at the right time. And what I know now, there's more money to be made in properties that have a little bit of dirt on them. But I didn't want to get into that, and I didn't know how to get into it, and I didn't, it was my first property. So I was wanting something that was polished and ready to go.
Right. I'm assuming it would be a lot more difficult to be managing the rehab when you're not used to managing rehabs, especially if you're in New York and the properties in Texas.
Yeah.
Did you start buying any that needed and doing rehabs out of
No,
town?
I never did. I bought so I ended up buying four homes from 2009 to 2000, I think 11, maybe 12. And every home I purchased, I bought it with less and less of my own money. So I bought it more intelligently or more leveraged. My first house, I put 25% down on a $76,000 purchase. My second house, it was $81,000 purchase. I only put 10% down. It was done through a home path program. But that was again, there's actually a tenant in that property whenever I purchased it, and that was built in 2006. So it was relatively new, and it was just a really good buy. My third house, it was a foreclosure, but it was on the MLS, and I think it needed a couple $1,000s, but that was it. Bought for 65,000, and then we got it appraised a month or two later for $86,000. So had a significant amount of equity in it, and I bought it all cash um, for 65, and I had a credit card that I used that was 0% interest for 12 months. I think that was 10,000, and then the rest was my own cash I'd made from advertising. At this time, I had climbed the corporate ladder, and I was actually the youngest vice president of a New York City advertising agency. So I was making six figures. So I was able to save some cash, and I was still living the lifestyle that I was living from a expenses standpoint whenever I first moved to New York. So I never increased my cost of living. Um, and I did a cash out refinance on that third house. So I essentially got all of my money back since it appraised for 86,000, and that's tax free. So then so I took that money back, I put it in my savings account, and then my fourth house, I got approved for a line of credit of $40,000, and I bought that from a wholesaler. And this would be the closest one I got to rehabbing, because I purchased it for 35,000, and the wholesaler said it needed $5,000 worth of improvements. Well, it ended up needing about 15,000 once
Mm.
we got into it, and instead of taking 1 month, it took about 4 months to do the improvements. And uh, and it rented whenever we before we purchased it, the previous tenant allegedly was renting it for $795 a month. And I thought for sure after $15,000 worth of improvements, I'd be able to get at least $900. Well, we rented it for $795 again after
Mm.
trying to put it on the market and get that get premium price, which it all had to do with where it was located. Location, location, location. So I got a taste of a rehab. I didn't like the taste because it wasn't. I was trying to do it from 1,500 miles away while having a 60, 70 hour full-time job, um, and it just wasn't my thing. But then at that point, I also realized that that's how you make good money in real estate. So I decided to take that similar type of model, where you buy properties that need work, and then increase the value and cash in on it. I decided to take that approach, not to single family, but scaled it up to multifamily.
All right. So with the single family though that you were doing, so you were shooting for a cash flow. It's like you wanted some equity built into the deal, but then you were shooting for a cash flow of $100. So how were you confidently calculating and doing analysis to figure out that you would get $100 at least for the cash flow?
Yeah, I would just use there's a free online mortgage calculator, and I can send you the link. But there was just something I stumbled across on the internet, and I just would plug my numbers into this online calculator, and it would factor in all the expenses that are incurred whenever buy home, and then I used that information and ended up just evaluating the properties and running the numbers through that spreadsheet.
So were you, accounting for vacancies and different things like that, maintenance?
Yeah, yeah. I'd account for vacancies. I'd account for um, the property management fees on the lease ups or on the lease and on the renewal, and then also maintenance on an ongoing basis, property taxes. Um, I think those are the big ones.
So
Yeah,
what
mortgage,
types of
obviously.
I'm interested in finding out what kinds of numbers that you use, and it probably varies for each, location at least maybe, but are there certain numbers like 3% or something for certain things, or 10% for vacancy? I mean, are there any kind of rules of thumb for any of these numbers?
Um, I haven't bought up a house since 2012. And I'm not actively buying homes anymore. I could answer that question with multifamily because I'm buying multifamily. It's a different type of analysis. But with single family, I don't remember the rules of thumb. I just would plug it into a calculator that I had and run the numbers.
Okay, well, we can talk a little bit more about the numbers we talk when we get into more of the multifamily. So tell me, how did you make the transition from buying the single family homes? up to the bigger multifamily. And what do you mean by multifamily? Were you buying duplexes and fourplexes at first, or were you? How did you transition into that?
Well, I went from my buying that fourth house that I mentioned. That was $35,000, and then the next thing I purchased was a 168 unit for 6.35 million. So there was
Wow, that's a
no,
big jump.
yeah, there was no transition, my friend. It
Did
was,
you have a mentor for something like that, or did you
yeah,
just okay?
yeah, I did. Um, I found a couple people that I paid, and they helped me learn the business, learn how to evaluate the deals, learn how to underwrite properties and find the right markets, and then learn the best ways to position yourself, and then ultimately how to raise money because I'd never raised a penny before. Um, and I raised over $1 million on my first deal, which isn't typical. And there are many things I would do differently if I could go back. One of them is I would have raised the money before I had the deal because it was quite a stressful experience having something under contract but not having the money to close on it.
Especially with that kind of money. But I guess that forced you to really take action and do what needed to be done. How could you tell us a little bit more about maybe how you found that property and where it was maybe, and then walk us through how you did that deal?
Yeah, sure. I found the property through a broker that I ended up, getting to know, and how I found the deal through him, and how I found him initially was just I attended a seminar, and in the seminar there was just a market report on. I was actually in Tulsa, Oklahoma, market report, and I got to know people in Tulsa, and then that network effect just expanded and expanded, and I ended up meeting a broker who shared with me this opportunity in Cincinnati, where I'd never been. I was actually looking in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but this deal in Cincinnati just came about, and it just made a whole lot of sense. So what I did is I ended up uh, reaching out to a couple of my investors, and I thought initially that I'd need to raise about $400,000, and that was a major stretch for me. I thought I could raise about 200 and $250,000, perhaps. But yeah, again, I'd never raised a penny before, so the dollars were quite scary to me.
Right. So what was do you remember the price of the property and then what you ended up getting it under contract for?
Yeah, it was the initial price was 6.7, ended up getting it under contract for 6.35, and it appraised for 6.7 whenever we went through the process.
Wow. And so how many units was that? You said 100
68.
168 units. What kind of shape was it in?
It was in decent shape. It had high occupancy, but one of the things I've learned to ask is what's the economic occupancy, not just the physical occupancy. The physical occupancy uh, accounts for the number of people in the apartment community, how many apartments are leased, and then the economic occupancy is how many of those apartments that are leased are actually paying you rent. A very important distinction. And I
Okay.
didn't,
Oh,
I didn't,
yeah, because I guess they could tell you there's that many people there, but maybe they're not all paying the rent, huh?
yeah, yeah, that's
Right.
that's that's an important
So
question.
were they, so was that property one where you learned that you should have asked that?
Yes.
Okay. Was it like a crazy number of people that weren't paying?
It ended up being, I'd say, a physical occupancy, so number of units leased of about 96%, and an economic occupancy of about 80%, I'd say, whenever we took it over. So I'd say, a significant
Yeah, that is a
difference.
good number of
Yeah.
people not paying. Yeah.
Yeah, especially when you got 168 units, because if you're at whatever 90% is of, or 96% of 168, What is that times 0.96? That's 161. So you've got 8 units um, that are vacant, um, essentially. But if you got 168 times zero point 0.8, now you've got 34 units that are either vacant or you have people in there but aren't paying. So it's the difference between 34 and 8 units, which is quite significant.
Wow. So did you, what kind of things did you look at in determining whether you wanted to buy that property or not? Like what made you pull the trigger on that one?
Yeah, I'll answer that, but just to close the loop on the economic and physical so that I don't leave people
Oh,
hanging
okay.
on, like, okay, you should ask for it. Well, how the heck do you check it? Well, how you check it is during due diligence, you ask for the bank statements of the LLC that owns the property. And that LLC's bank statements will show deposits in, money going out. And you'll simply verify that they actually are receiving the money in their bank account
Mhm.
that they're reporting on their profit and loss statement.
All right. So that's a common thing to ask for, and you should expect to be able to see that when, especially I guess for that sort of price range of property.
Exactly. Now, as far as the indicators that I where I knew it was a good purchase, because it was a good purchase, is one, going back to my mistake on the fourth house I bought, where it didn't lease for the amount that I wanted it to. This had the location that I desired. It was in the path of progress. What I mean by that is there's a Chipotle that was built about 3 years ago that was within a football field distance away from the property. The property's on a main road that has 40,000 cars passing it on a daily basis. If you're driving the speed limit, then you're passing the property for 17 seconds. I mean, major,
Wow.
major frontage for people to look at. It leases like crazy. Um, so uh, and the second largest Kroger marketplace in all of Ohio. And Kroger is headquartered in Ohio. So the second largest Kroger marketplace, and if you're not familiar with the difference of a Kroger and a Kroger marketplace, a Kroger just has food. A Kroger marketplace has, it's much larger. It has food, it has clothing, it has like mechanic stuff, houseware, all sorts of things. So the second largest Kroger marketplace in all of Ohio was built there. Let's see, 2 months before we closed on the property, or excuse me, 2 months after we closed on the property. So we closed on it, and 2 months later that opened up. So the people headquartered at Kroger have have identified this area as being an area of growth as well. So the check the box on the area. It's an incredible area.
Yeah, it's an
Uh,
awesome idea, a way to determine whether the area is growing or decaying, right?
Absolutely. Anytime I look at a property, I always just Google McDonald's, and lately it's Chipotle because McDonald's just aren't popping up like they used to. But I used to Google McDonald's and just find where the closest McDonald's is. Then I drive there and I'd see what type of shape is it in, how recently was it built, and see how far away it is from my property. Because the McDonald's people are pretty smart. They know where to put their real estate. McDonald's is a real estate corporation, and by the way, they sell burgers. So that's one thing I always look for. And the McDonald's is also it's even closer than the Chipotle for this property. So it was in a great area. That was the main reason, and then the opportunity to increase rents over time and put in better quality or better qualified, excuse me, better qualified residents who have the ability to pay and and see that upside. And we also bought it with something, as I know you're familiar with this, a master lease, where we are technically not, we didn't purchase it. We're leasing it from the seller with an option to purchase it whenever we choose to. And the reason why we did that is because there's a large prepayment penalty on the property. And we
Hmm.
would have triggered about $1 million prepayment penalty to the lender if we would have purchased it outright, which we're not going to do that. Nobody would do that. So we did a master lease where we're taking over the income. So we receive all the income. We have to pay all the expenses. We pay the mortgage. We pay the tax. We pay the insurance. All the expenses, and we also receive the principal pay down. The equity that results from the principal pay down on the mortgage. So we're getting equity from the principal pay down while we have it under the master lease and while the prepayment penalty, or also called defeasance, burns off.
Wow. So, did you ever find out what the reason behind them selling the place was?
Yeah, they're developers at heart, and they wanted to take the cash and go develop something.
Oh, I see. And so what kind of cash flow numbers were you looking at as soon as you bought it? Do you remember?
Yeah, oh, I vividly. Yeah, the apartment stuff I remember. By the way, while we were talking, I looked up the mortgage calculator I used, and I also looked up the formulas that I used for the single family home stuff. So if you want me to quickly mention that, I will.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so the mortgage calculator I used, and let me just make sure it still works. The link's still good. Um, yeah, it's
I'm
still
wondering if
good.
it's going to be the one that is it not working anymore?
No, it's good. It's good. It works. It's www.goodmortgage.com/. It gets a little ugly with this. You
Yeah, we'll
just go.
include it in the show
Yeah,
notes.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'll send you the link, but it's goodmortgage.com/CALC_investment_property.htm. So,
Okay.
it's a little ugly.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then to answer your question about the monthly expenses and maintenance fees, because I had this down to a science. I just haven't practiced the science in 3 years. Um, I took 10% of the expected monthly rent, and I multiplied that by 2.5, and that's what I used as a placeholder for monthly expenses.
So expected monthly rent times 2.5.
10% of expected monthly
Okay.
rent times 2.5, and those are my monthly expenses.
And then you looked at how much rent you were currently getting.
Yep. And I assumed 4% inflation and 6% property value growth.
I'm
And
sorry,
all
what was the last one?
property value growth. And the only reason I had that 6% is that's just a default in this calculator. So
Okay.
I was just going with it.
And this is for the single families, right? Is
Yeah,
what you were talking
yeah.
about. Okay.
It's interesting to look back on those single family purchases now because it's been, a good amount of time. The first one I bought for 76,000, it's worth at least 100,000, and it rents for $200 more. But that area is decreased in desirability, Duncanville. Now I'm renting to a Section 8 tenant, but I'm renting for $200 more than what I was to someone who wasn't Section 8.
Mm.
So more rent, but the property's appreciated about 30,000 because I bought it at the perfect time in 2009. But not much upside in appreciation. The second house I bought for 81,000 or 86, 81 or 86,000. 81, final answer. I bought it for 81,000, and that property is probably worth 120. That was in a good area of Fort Worth, Texas. It rents for the same amount that it rented for originally, which I believe is $1,200. That property is in a good area and solid rental and totally maintenance free because it's so new, built in 2006. Third house, that one's I bought for 65 and it was appraised for 86. It's probably worth around 110,000 according to Zillow, and um, that rents for $1,100. And then the fourth house I sold because it was the Ugly Duckling. It was built in 1960 something. Uh, it had bad karma with right out of the gate, and I wanted to get rid of that one. So I sold that through actually to a wholesaler,
Mm.
so they could do their thing and
And so you had 30-year notes on them on
oh
the
yeah,
first
that's
three.
another interesting thing. Um I have two 30s and one 15. On my first house, I bought with a 30, but then I spoke to my brother-in-law who also invests in properties, and he has American Airlines Credit Union, and he's like, well, I just refinanced for a 15-year at, I forget the interest rate numbers, but it was much lower than mine. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. I went that holiday break to American Airlines Credit Union, signed up because I could sign up through him. He's a pilot for American Airlines, and I ended up getting this is this is so awesome and crazy. I ended up getting the like plus or minus $10 mortgage payment with American Airlines Credit Union, but switching it from a 30 to a 15
Yeah,
year.
that's crazy.
Yeah, yeah, it was incredible, and it was just a result of building up equity, buying it right, and just being at the right place at the right time with the interest rates.
Yeah, awesome. And then for the big, the 168 unit, how did you go about, determining, uh, what you were going to pay for that property?
Well, it's all about how much money it spits off. So the NOI, net operating income, income minus expenses equals the NOI, and then dividing that by the cap rate, the capitalization rate for that area. Um, so I had a sense of what the cap rate was, and I knew how we were going to underwrite the property with the NOI. So I just did the math, and then I looked at comps. Then we also got the appraisal, but the appraisal was done during due diligence. It just verified that we were correct. Whenever we had got under contract for 6.35 and it appraised for 6.7.
Yeah, do you know what the cap rate was?
Yeah, it was I believe a 9 cap at the time. It's fortunately it's gone down since then because multifamily's so hot right now. Um, so I'd say the area is probably an 8 cap at this point, but when we bought it, we were about a 9.
Can you explain the cap rate a little bit more?
Yeah, so cap rate is capitalization rate. Basically, if you pay all cash for something, that's the percent back of cash flow that you'll get for it. So if it's a 2 cap, then I don't know why you're buying it because you can probably get better on a bond.
Yeah.
But if it's but you'll find that the cap rates are lower in markets that are more mature, um, or hot, like more mature being New York City, hot like Austin, um, and then the cap rates are higher in markets that are not as developed or perceived um, slower grower, or more risk. So the 9 cap in this instance was Cincinnati.
And so do you shoot for a certain cap rate, or is that based on just where the property is and how much you want the property?
I wanted at least an 8 cap because with an 8 cap I can pay my investors and then also um, pay myself and have some upside in the property.
All right. So you like the cash flow on that one with the loan and everything. Can you give us an idea of what kind of cash flow that was thrown off?
Yeah, it was over 8% year one, and we put in 1.3 million as a down payment. So 8% on that 1.3 million was the cash flow for year one, and then we're continuing to improve it and get it to a place where we're going to significantly increase the value of the property.
Nice. All right. So how do you manage these properties? Is it, like I guess for something that big, you sort of have on-site management, right?
Yeah, the rule of thumb is you have one manager and one maintenance person for every 100 units. So with 168 units, we've got 1.5. We have a full-time community manager and a leasing agent, a part-time, and we have a maintenance person full-time, and we have maintenance support staff who help out on unit turns and miscellaneous things.
All right. And so do you have sort of like the manager hiring those whenever you have turnover from the maintenance people?
Yeah, it's usually a set team. But yeah, the manager is going to be the one who's leading the charge on everything.
So do you have to go and basically, spend time just keeping an eye on things and making sure that they're doing things properly? I mean, how much time do you spend on things like that?
Yeah, it's important to oversee things. One, it all boils down to the numbers. So you want to keep track of the numbers and you want to look at that with a magnifying glass every month. And then you also want to take visits to the property, especially if you're local. You want to see it and oversee it more so than you would single family homes. I mentioned I didn't look at properties, my single family homes in person, but certainly do that with the multifamily stuff because it's a whole different game, and also I'm investing other people's money.
Yeah, and it's a lot of money at that. Um, what so with properties like that, I would imagine like knowing what kind of maintenance is going to come up is a big deal because it costs so much. So like the roofing and things like that, when you have to replace it for so many units, do you take any of that into consideration whenever you buy?
Yeah, absolutely. You gotta allocate towards what they call CapEx, capital expenditures, and you want to allocate usually $250 per unit per year um, to CapEx for roof, for plumbing, for pavement, things that just go out that last years, but eventually will come up if you have hold on to the property long enough.
All right, so that's a good rule of thumb. Then the 250 per unit per year. Just set that aside for all those maintenance
Yep,
items.
exactly.
So, what are your plans right now? I mean, what are you looking for more large apartment buildings, and do you have sort of a limit on the size?
No limit on the size, and except that 150 plus is my limit. I won't look at anything less. And the plans are just to acquire the next one. I just got done last month acquiring a 250 unit in Houston, and then on to the next one, and also making sure that the ones in the portfolio, the 168 and the 250, perform.
Oh yeah, yeah. And what cities are you looking in right now?
Actually, all over. Really, we identify the opportunity, and then we make sure that the market makes sense, and we have expertise in the local team member in that market that we trust and we've worked with before or have referrals. So really, it's a matter of identifying the right opportunity, and making sure it's a market that we like based on certain criteria that we use. But we're looking all over the U.S.
Nice. Let's see here. As far as any kind of mistakes that you've made, I know you talked about learning about the different types of occupancy and how important that was. Are there any other like sort of mistakes that you've made that you would have liked to have avoided?
My friend, we do not have time for all the mistakes.
Well, one
Yeah,
mistake that stands
yeah.
out, maybe.
I would say, jeez, another mistake would be, I think hiring a property management company is one thing, but it's another if the property management company has money in the deal and they're part owners with you, and it's a whole nother thing if they raise money from investors and bring their own money into the deal because then they are a partner and they're not a vendor. So that's one thing that we did with this Houston deal, my last deal, 250 units, where the property management company actually invested their own money into the deal.
Oh wow.
Now that's great for accountability, but the downside is if we get in a disagreement, then we're stuck with them. We can fire the management company, but they're still partners with us. So you want to make sure that you do that with a company that you know, like, and trust, and have a long relationship with, or have good vibes with, and that you're writing the contracts so that you can fire the management company, but they'd still be in as partners, because that's just what the initial agreement was.
Yeah, it's always hard to foresee what might be down the road when things come up. Everybody likes to hope everything ends up perfect, but it's not a perfect world, and like being careful up front with thinking through what could happen and then making sure that each of those risks are made aware, whenever you're drawing up the paperwork. So have you had a problem with something like that before?
No, not a problem before, but um, it's always better to add that other layer of accountability, because I think as we grow our business, we can always evolve it so that it's better. And I think that's the next evolution of my business is to have those types of partners. Similar to how um, where when people raise money, they typically do joint venture first, where they partner with someone. Then they do a syndicated deal where they raise money for a deal, and then after that they have a fund where they raise money for a fund and then buy multiple deals within the fund. So it's just another evolution of the company.
Yeah, that's cool. Is there a book that you've been reading and enjoying lately that you'd like to recommend?
Um, I just read, or I just started to read Pitch Anything, so that's pretty interesting. But I'm only on page 9, so I won't recommend that. I'd recommend Crucial Conversations. Crucial Conversations is all about how to communicate with others whenever opinions vary and the stakes are high, and they talk about establishing a mutual purpose where you can boil down the root of each other's perspectives and start with what both of you um, have in common on your purpose and then build up from there.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like a good book. I think I'll get on Amazon after this and order that one. Add
Oh,
it
it's
to my
fantastic.
stack of 10 books on my nightstand that I'm working my way through. But um,
And I just sent you the link to the mortgage calculator, by the way.
okay, yeah, and I'll definitely put that on the show notes page. How can all the flipping junkies out there, all the people listening to the podcast, find you?
Well, all you flipping junkies out there, I love the many connotations that are associated with the flipping junkies. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
uh, I will say that my podcast is will be very beneficial for you because I interview uh, experts like Danny, and I actually have many different episodes with podcasts or with flipping experts, and I the best way to find me is just Google my name, Joe Fairless, and you can check out my website. You can go to the podcast. If you want to send me a note, just put send me a note through my website, the contact Joe page. I read all of those, so happy to connect. You can also find me on Facebook where I give the episode every day. Every day's episodes published on Facebook, so you can track that and listen to the episodes that you want to listen to, or just go subscribe on iTunes.
cool, great. So we create show notes page for every episode on flippingjunkie.com. So I'll also have links for all of those things for Joe's website and to the Facebook page and everything on the show notes page. And that can be found at flippingjunkie.com/podcast/Joe Fairless. And Fairless is Fairless. That's correct, right?
You got it.
All right, good. And really enjoyed having you on the show. You're a down to earth guy, and I always enjoy talking to people that are somewhat like me, and I feel like you are. So that's really cool. Um, thanks for being so generous with your time and information, Joe.
Thanks a lot, Danny. I'm grateful to be on the show and really glad that we got to know each other a little bit better on this one, in addition to when I interviewed you.
Cool. All right. Well, have a great one.
All right. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on iTunes, as that helps a lot with the podcast. And be sure to check out the podcast next week. I've got my good friend Nathan Crone here from San Antonio sharing a lot of great stuff. So be sure to listen in next week. See you then.